Great. So we're having a conversation today about the SingleQueue per shard project, and we're going to start with just a bit of an update from Sean on the catch-all project, and then we'll see how we're going to move that into SingleQueue per shard.
Yeah, so the catch-all project, Craig is going to pick up on his Tuesday, so overnight in Europe, because today was a holiday for him. So that's for the blank stuff, and then there's a question about, so for the observability operational related stuff, he mentioned we don't want to go to production without that. So there's two items there that are both sort of in progress. I've suggested that we could go to staging without those, and go to just not do it in production, but I'll see what he says when he's back.
Who's got those two?
I've got one, which is in review, and Matt has the other. So let me find them. So what's the other one called? Look at the epic.
So the one was called observability contents, and the other one's called observability operates on workers. Are those the two?
No. Wait a second.
Sure.
Observability contents, observability operates on workers instead of queues is just the
exit criteria.
Yeah, the other one is the add a method to allow SREs to intervene, etc. But that's actually documentation rather than code. So the documentation MR is just in review. So that's actually in review with Matt, but the other person who would review that, I guess, is Craig. So
Okay.
either way, there's kind of a dependency on like what we're already doing. So either way, it's somebody who's already working on this in some other capacity who needs to review that.
Okay.
So, and obviously there's not many issues left, but the last couple could take a while, depending on if we find any issues with moving particular workloads to the default shard. So, I mean, if everything goes smoothly, we could basically be done this week, but it's equally possible that, I say basically done, we could be pretty much done in the next week or so. But it's also possible that it could sort of drag on for a bit longer as we discover issues with particular workloads.
Well, if it's a case that, I mean, at least it sounds like we've got to do rollout monitoring, check that it's running okay, and only at that point we can say that we're finished with it. But if we at least get through putting it onto production this week, we can then get started with the rest of them, with the rest of the SingleQueue per shard work early next week.
Yes, with the caveat that most of that work will be pretty similar to the rollout work here.
But we would still have to prep all of that stuff. Like we still got to create all the change issues for that line of which ones we're going to do in which order and that type of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's fine. The only issue with if we did overlap the rollout is we wouldn't be able to measure the impacts as clearly from one to the other. But I'm not sure you're saying we should overlap the rollout. I think you're just saying we should go and get the issues created.
Yeah, I think that at least if the issues are created and especially the change issues, if they're all prepped to go, then when it comes to doing the rollout, it's all prepared and it's just a case of getting through that. Whereas at the moment, what is actually required for SingleQueue per shard isn't documented anywhere. It's sort of it's knowledge in people's heads right now that I'd like to get out so that we can understand how big it is.
No, that's fair. So from my perspective, the two, so I think we could potentially do this with no additional backend development. But there is a weird bit in the way selecting queues works, which is why we picked default, because this will work with both ways. So if you use the queue selector, which we are doing now, and we will continue to do even after this epic is done, because it will work both ways, you have to select a queue that the application knows the name of. So you can't just say, well, you can with but that doesn't apply to the queue, the worker routing. So like you can say, I want workers matching this feature category to go to the memory bound queue. But if you're using the queue selector, you have no way to listen to the memory bound queue because the application doesn't know that there is a memory bound queue. It's just something you made up in your configuration. If you don't use the queue selector, you can listen to a memory bound queue. And the point of this is to get away from using the queue selector. So that might work. But I think it is confusing. And I think we might want to consider, I don't know, because I think I mentioned this to you, Wang Min. I don't know what you think about that, but I think it's quite confusing that like using one method, like if you use that config option, like most of the time they're basically equivalent, but the one case where they're not equivalent is if you use a queue name that doesn't exist in the application.
Yeah, you mentioned that, and I think we only agree that eventually just one of them can exist at the same time, and we can accept that we can use either queue selector or the queue routing features.
Okay, that's fine. Then we could also decide to do that. So yeah, I think one reason the queue selector works this way at the moment is, you know, if you're selecting by name, you could say, well, if I'm selecting a queue by name and that name doesn't exist, just listen to it anyway. But if you're selecting by attribute, say you're selecting queues by feature category is issue tracking, it won't know that there's a queue that you think has issue tracking that it doesn't know about, right? Like the only attribute it could add missing queues on is name, which is why it, like whatever we do will be confusing, basically, to a certain extent. Because like it can't know about any other attributes of that queue other than the name. So I think we could do either way, and that's why I say there might not be any backend development needed. The other big question is, so we've got a list, I think it's in the optional follow-up items under workers that depend on checking their own queue size. So we've got a list of some workers that we know that we need to not put in a queue with other workers, because these workers expect to be able to say how many of this job are scheduled by looking at their own queue. And if their own queue has other stuff in it, they'll always be like, whoa, there's loads scheduled. Or not always, but they will potentially be like, whoa, there's loads scheduled, when actually there isn't, because they're looking at, that's not how you measure that.
Is this an exhaustive list? Like, is this every, or these?
These are all the ones we know of. So it's the unknown unknowns that are the problem here. So I don't think we should address these in the one queue per shard.
So I'm trying to find that issue.
Oh, sorry, I'll put it in the doc.
It doesn't look like that's the right issue, though.
No, it's
yeah, it's not the right issue.
Workers that check that it's 1087. I got it. Oh, well done, Holman.
So we've got, so I actually don't know what GitLab sidekick queue is, so let me just look that up first.
Okay, so there's 4 here.
Yeah, so the 2 hash migration ones actually don't run on production.
Okay, helpful. That's convenient.
Because production is already fully on hash storage, although as it turns out, staging isn't. So we had an incident about that the other day, and we disabled support for non-hash storage. GitLab sidekick queue is about the API that we actually provided for admins to be able to delete jobs from a queue. And that actually should work basically fine. Like we don't need to really do anything about that. It just needs to accept queues that don't work. That might not exist in the configuration, but I think it already does. The Elasticsearch stuff, I think, doesn't apply because it's checking a queue size of a queue it maintains. It's not a scikit queue, so that's fine. It's got its own queuing system. Okay. Then there's the update all mirrors worker / project import schedule worker. So that needs to stay in its own queue. But then there's a couple of things already on catch-all that need to stay in their own queue, I think. Let me find what they were. Oh, maybe there wasn't. What have I done with the rollout issue? Let me just find that. So basically, what I'm trying to say is, like, at this point, we can make a decision whether we try and fix those workers to allow this, or whether we don't. So, like, at the moment, project import schedule, we're just excluding from this project with the reference to that issue 1087.
I think that it makes sense to exclude them from the project. I mean, if we exclude them from the project, we're going to land up having one. Do we just then have one shard with a bunch of queues like this on it? Like, do they all go on their own shard? Do we just stick them on catch-all with their own names?
No, so they end up on the shard that they do now. So, like, for instance, at the end of this project, catch-all will listen to mailers, default, and project import schedule. Because, like, project import schedule is a queue we can't
just throw in the bin right now.
So if we come across any of those on other shards, I think we'd do the same. So if we find a worker on memory bounds that we can't migrate, which we don't know about, but we might do, then we would keep that listened to on memory. So memory bound would listen to the memory bound queue plus this other queue. So I think in terms of orders of magnitude, that would be fine. It's just I guess it's technical there. It's a potential trap. Like, and if we're advising, if we get to the point where we recommend this to self-manage, because at the moment the docs say don't do this, basically, we need to make it very clear, like, what you do about these queues. So if we end up with like 1 or 2, it might be worth us trying to, like, work with the relevant teams to try and fix them. If we end up with like 10, then that gets a bit more tricky because A, we're listening to more queues, and B, that's more ground for us to cover. So hopefully it'll just be 1 or 2.
I think that at the end of the project, I don't want there to be ambiguity as to how you use Sidekick. And I don't want there to be a situation where people can look at the existing configuration and go, oh, well, they have their own one, so we can have our own one. And then we get this explosion of named queues again. So I think we should keep it out of this project, but we need to go back and work with the teams to get these resolved. And I'm just really hoping that there's less than 10.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to create that issue, which actually Bob had already created, and then we sort of closed that issue because, like, we'd done the work on it, but then we needed another issue to keep open. So the idea of this issue is to stay open, basically, and say, like, this is the list, and then we can add related issues to that of, like, the ones that we know about that we need to be fixed. Actually, on those hash storage ones, they don't run on GitLab.com, which obviously means that, you know, we're fine with them, but they can run on self-managed, and they could run on staging. But I think the stuff the Geo team were doing in 14.0 might be to remove those anyway.
Okay.
So I would need to check that, because that might help us out a bit as well. So yeah.
Okay.
Because if it just ends up as the mirroring one, that's a known sort of tricky case, and we could, like, potentially help out there, or see, like, you know, what we can recommend, because I think there's also some suggestion that we just rewrite mirroring. So yeah. I say we, I mean,
Yeah.
team. Us.
I'm just noting this down.
So I guess the TLDR of all that is that I think that this project is potentially all rollout.
Okay.
Because we've basically done all of the other work in this project because we had to, because we can't do any rollout until we've done all the other work. I don't know what you think, Wang Min. Is there something I've missed? I mean, there might be something we don't know about that I've missed.
Yes, I just want to say that there are a lot of uncertainties in this SingleQueue purchase project because previously we have done a lot of exploration and try out each worker to see whether it can work with SingleQueue. But in the project, there are still bunches of workers, and we are not quite sure until now. So I don't think that the rolling out will be that smooth. We still need like a backend engineer to actually want to explore on the workers in each queue. I mean, in each site to see whether we can migrate that worker or not.
So has all of that inspection into the workers not already been done? Is that not how we came up with this list of workers that watch their own queues?
That was based on knowing certain patterns that we use, but like there might be some patterns that are specific to other shards. One thing I would say there, Wang Min, is like if you look at the other shards, like they don't run anywhere near as many queues. So we could just go one by one on the workers for each of, like we could say like before we do urgent other, we look at all of the 20 odd workers that run on urgent other and you know go through those, because like there's between 20 and 30. That's not, that's tractable. It's not so tractable for the 240 odd on the catch-all. So I think that is an option.
So should we raise an issue per shard, not catch-all, to just assess the workers that are on there to confirm that they can migrate? Because if we've taken the risk of doing this on catch-all, like what is it just a different type of risk doing this on the others?
Well, I think it makes sense to do it by shard anyway, right? So we would say like if we want to do another shard after catch-all, these are the steps we're going to do. So first step would be look at all the workers that run on that shard. Are there any that obviously check their queue size? There should be a fairly quick check because most don't, but like obviously some will be more complicated. Then the second step is, okay, that looks fine. Let's go create the change issues and start the rollout basically. So I just consider that like a pre-check step before creating the change issue. I don't think that's necessarily a huge task on its own. I don't know what you think, Wang Min.
Yeah, I think it is just like a recheck before we do the rolling out. And maybe we have like an after check to verify that as well.
Sorry, and a check afterwards.
Yes, a check afterward to check on the metrics and it was the business logic as well. And we are not quite the one who are really confident in the worker logic. So we may involve the owner of the worker as well. Like if we continue with the electric shard site, we have to involve the global shard team.
Yes.
In the rolling out as well.
So that one's kind of a special case because that one's owned by a particular team and the rest are sort of like general. But yes, I think that's a fair point. But yeah, I sort of see it as like, hopefully this is fairly mechanical, although we do need to write up the steps. We need to, I suppose that would be the first step, is to write up the steps we should do before and after to check that we think this shard is safe to migrate, and then how to migrate it, and then what to look for after it's migrated, and then we would go and do those for each shard. So yeah, that's
so. Another question is, one just came to mind. No idea, it's gone. It's popped out of my head. I've put the notes here, so we're gonna keep the task of fixing and renaming the queues. So fixing the remaining named queues out of this project. Then for each of the shards that exist, we're going to raise an issue per shard to look at the worker and create a change issue. Now remember the question. Can we copy the structure of the catch-all migration change issue for these ones?
Yes, but the catch-all one's more complicated because we're doing it in multiple steps. Whereas these ones we probably won't do in multiple steps. Maybe for one or two of them we will, but like if the Elasticsearch shard listens to 9 queues, that's smaller than some of the steps we'll be taking on the catch-all shard.
Yeah.
So then what I will do is I will ask what I'm volunteering to do is to create all of the change issues so that people don't have to I mean, it's like it's admin. So who can create the first one so that I can make the copies?
I think that would be that would be part of that first step. So like the first step I was saying, where we define like, these are the pre-checks, this is the change issue, this is what we look for afterwards. Because also looking post checks, like what we look for after rolling out the change, are part of the change issue anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it says like, what do you look for? So I think, I mean,
Yeah, is it just like a change proposal on road?
I wonder if we could just use change issues for this now, because change issues also have pre-checks. So I wonder if we just have a long pre-check and a long post-check, and we just say we just create a template for the change issues, and then we do it all in there. I don't know if that's going to be too big, though.
Because then you have one epic, which is the epic we already have, and then each of these is just a single change issue per shard.
Yeah, and then if we need to create a blocking issue from any of those, we can, but we don't need any more issues than just one per shard if we don't have anything unusual.
Yeah, because also if we're going to be bringing in any stage groups because something has gone wrong on the shard, we would then raise a specific issue, which is this worker didn't work, or this worker is a problem. But that's like we only have to create those if something is not working properly. Like rather than creating a whole bunch of issues and a whole bunch of change issues, I agree. Let's just use change issues.
Yeah, and we're already having that problem a little bit with the catch-all stuff, because we have like issues in our tracker that say like we need to do this, and then we have a change issue that says we need to do this.
We need to do that. Yeah.
But here's the checklist as well, and it's in the right tracker.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and raise the first one, and I'll ask, who should I ask to just to build up that issue with me so that I can then go and create all the others. Is that something that you and I can do, Huangmin, or is that something I should get, I should ask Matt or Craig to help with?
Yep, I can do that.
Yeah, I think it would be good to get, well, you need to get SRE review anyway. So it'd be good to get Matt or Craig to review it. But I think yeah, if you two do it together initially and then go from there, they can, because there's also this clone issue, quick action as well now. So you can.
Yeah.
Okay. So then, Huangmin, if you create the first one and get Craig to do the review, and then send it my way, and I'll raise all of the remaining for the rest of the shard.
Yep. Okay.
Shards, plural.
Yeah, I think it would be good to say that the first step of like checking the queues that are to be migrated is done by a backend engineer on the team, and then they pass it to an SRE to actually like execute the change, rather than make Matt and Craig do all of this.
Yeah,
no, for sure.
I
also think that some of the post checks should be done by backend engineers as well, because what I'm really hoping is that we can do this, like Craig rolls it out, backend engineers check it, Matt gets like some kind of prep. Like I'm trying to use the whole the time zones in our favor here, so that we could just sort of smash through it and be done.
Yeah, I think that could work well. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so we have a plan on what we're going to do next. Is there anything else we want to cover on this? Because if we could keep this to half an hour, then that's amazing. I don't think we need the whole hour. Cool. I hear silence. That's great. So this is done. I'll write this up. We'll get started with this, and hopefully we get the catch-all shard progressing along nicely so that we could get started with this part next week. But let's see how we get on.
Actually, I have one question. So
Yeah.
what are the exit criteria for this epic? So basically we migrate it on the chart, or we have to like delegate the queue selector, or we want to push that to later.
I would push that to later because we can only realistically do that in GitLab 15.0, which will be next May. So,
so yeah, so
it's
we
going to be a long
need
project
to migrate
otherwise.
all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. It took
So
like 1 month to migrate just one change.
Yeah, exactly. We just have to support both for a year, basically. But that gives us time to like, shake out any issues, like improve the documentation, etc., etc. So it's not all bad.
So I think the biggest success criteria for this was related to the OKR that we set, which was to reduce the CPU the peak CPU saturation from 75 to 25%.
Whoa, did we say that?
Sorry, no, not sorry. My brain is not completely on. To no more than 75%. Sorry.
Right, okay, good. So I was like, whoa.
I just shook you all up for a Monday morning.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, no. So I think that's
75%.
That's reasonable.
There we go.
The only question I have is we don't know what the saturation will be after we do the current project, because it's possible after we do the exactly. It's possible after we do catch-all it's already below 75%. In which case, great. Like so this is just about tidying up, which it is. Like it's a worthwhile project, but like I don't think we can necessarily say that's a goal until we see what this one does. Equally, if this one only takes off,
so if we put the two together, right? Like so if we say between catch-all and single queue per shard, the goals are to reduce the CPU saturation, but then the second goal is to not leave behind so much technical debt that we fall over it later. So how do we frame that sounding a bit more official? All over ourselves sounds a bit.
We could create an epic to do what Wang Min said, which is to remove the queue selector, and then we could say that we want to be able to do this in 15.0, so we need to do it for ourselves right now, like as early as possible. Or what's a better way of putting that? I think the way I would put it informally is just like, if we think this is the right way of configuring one shard, it should be the right way of configuring all shards, and having different shards using different configuration is adding complexity for everybody to deal with.
So having a standard, so all shards must have a standard configuration style.
Yeah.
And arguably the VM Kubernetes thing feeds into this as well. So yeah.
So that was another question. With the catch-all one, it sounded like, and I may have this wrong, it sounded like we have catch-all running on VMs and on Kubernetes right now, and the plan is to just have it running on Kubernetes at the end of this project.
Yes. Yeah, and when you say at the end of this project, that's usefully ambiguous, because it could mean before we close this project, it could mean just after we close this project. But it's basically, that should be trivial once we've done this project.
Okay, so well, the second question was going to be, if we're moving everything to Kubernetes, how will we know that we have made a significant change in this? Because if we've like, we need the before and after the change to match before we then add another change.
No, the only thing that's moving to Kubernetes is the catch-all legacy stuff. All the other shards are already on Kubernetes.
Perfect. Okay. Then I think what I'm also going to do is I'm going to raise one epic to be the parent of the catch-all and the single queue per shard, so that it's all wrapped up into one, because these are both related. Yes, there are two epics, but they're related in one, and the success criteria spans both.
Well,
so I'll push these together.
Why wouldn't we just say the parent one is the single queue per shard, and then the child epic of that was this one, which was all the prep work plus move the first shard, and then the issues in the other one are just move all the remaining shards.
So it's one epic with one child and a bunch of change issues.
Yes.
Yeah, I can do that. Okay, cool. Anything else?
there's one other issue, so that we should we prepare the communication plan for this project as well, because it could be a really long running migration, and on the startup should be aware of that, and maybe we want to try to revisit that again later.
Communication for self-managed administrators or communication for people who work at GitLab?
Yeah, for the GitLab worker. So that we need to communicate and try to notify the startup that we are trying to migrate to the new queue purchase model, and they should be aware of when they decide some new workers in future.
I think what would be helpful is when we've finished the project to say, we did this, we got this result. This is what we did in order to get that result. So when you add new workers, please bear this in mind, because then we're advertising the team at the same time.
Yeah, I think ideally, most people shouldn't have to know or care. So.
I get.
Like,
in the ideal world, yes, but I think
it's good to announce
nice
it
to tell people
afterwards. Yeah. But I don't think we need to. I don't know. I would hope we don't need to communicate this that much, because I think most people don't need to worry about it. Basically, like most people will just be like, "My jobs were working. My jobs continue to work."
I agree that's the goal. Like no one actually notices that we did anything. But I think we still need to tell people that it's there, because also if this has the impact we think it's going to have, it's going to be pretty awesome to have this much more headroom available. And it's just nice to advertise to people that we've done a cool thing and no one noticed, which is great.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Like we did a cool thing without breaking a bunch of stuff. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if we break something, everyone will know. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
But that's on us, not on them.
Yeah.
Cool. If there's nothing else, this has been a very productive call. I will go and put all of this into issues and get the ball rolling here. And yeah, let's see if we can get the catch-all stuff done this week.
Yeah.
Awesome. Hope you both have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.
Thanks, you too.